Hey everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my colleague, fellow breaking news reporter, Derek Saul. Derek, thanks for coming on once again.
Of course, thanks for having me.
President Biden announced his reelection campaign yesterday, and during the over 3 minute video, he failed to mention the economy. On the other hand, during the GOP's response, the economy was mentioned in the short 32-second AI generated video. The GOP has slammed President Biden over the economy, and during his presidency, we have seen sky high costs. So before we get into his reelection, can you take us a step back here and break down for us some of the driving forces that led us to see over 40-year high inflation last year?
Yeah, so I mean, overall, you'll get differing answers, kind of, especially within the political scene of where someone's, allegiances lie. I know early last year, the Biden administration had, and specifically President Biden, had been pretty insistent on calling it Putinflation, referring to Russian President Vladimir Putin and his ordering of the invasion of Ukraine, which destabilized specifically energy prices, but then also other commodities. Ukraine's like one of the largest grain producers in the world and blocking imports, yada, yada. And now you've seen a lot of Biden critics referring to it as Biden inflation. So based on, I mean, any sort of economist or expert that you would talk to would say there's way more inputs that go into global prices surging than one leader. I talked with Moody's Analytics economist Mark Zandi, and he was pretty clear. Roughly said that it's because you see high inflation everywhere. It's pretty clear that it's not necessarily any direct policy from Biden that is completely behind things. So really what we saw is in mid to late 2021, so in the beginning of Biden's administration, that's when we really saw prices start to go up. And the two primary macro economic factors that went into that were supply chain shocks stemming from the COVID pandemic, especially the Delta and Omicron waves, and kind of those unexpected. I'm sure you remember all the ports being backed up. There were some like really funny like scenes of like the satellite views. There was dozens of ships, especially lined up on the west coast of the U.S. And then also, of course, the geopolitical tensions, but specifically related to Russia and the U.S. and Europe, especially cutting off the import of most Russian goods.
So, what you're mentioning are international issues for the most part. Both the pandemic and Russia's war on Ukraine have impacted the entire globe. But the economy did worsen under President Biden so far since he took over as commander in chief. And you broke down the strengths and weaknesses of the Biden economy based on some key figures. So, let's start with the negatives. We already talked about inflation, but what are the other factors that have worsened since President Biden took over?
Yeah, so I will say of also kind of the main policy that was passed under Biden was the American Rescue Plan, the COVID stimulus package that was passed a couple months after he came into office. Zandy, that when I talked with him, he was pretty complimentary of it. If it definitely helped to stimulate the economy, create jobs, but also plenty of critics will also look at of how the stimulus checks kind of, especially related to the stock market, probably helped to create an artificial bump in equity prices. There was the rise of, this is a smaller chunk of things, but the rise of the Reddit meme trading, stuff like that. People did kind of have these, this newfound income that came across. So, and yeah, so going back with that of the negatives, I think the the most clear negative is definitely decline in household financial health. And I mean, I will say, I mean, I think it's hard with any, looking at under any administration, how, prior policies of earlier administrations, or especially too, I mean, just, like big macro events. So for example, Americans now are saving only 4% of their disposable income, which compares to 14% 2 years prior. So part of that, I will say, is definitely related to, people were saving so much, they were spending so little on leisure items during the height of the pandemic. You weren't traveling, you weren't spending as much on travel, eating out of restaurants. Um, but I think what you also definitely can attribute to higher inflation too is household debt surged 16% to 17 trillion while Biden's been in office. Um, so yeah, I mean, we're seeing people having to spend more, just to get by with prices being elevated, and also, seeing people, debt climbing, and then debt is also climbing with interest rates surging, and that obviously that comes from the Federal Reserve, which operates independently from the White House, but also it's it's tied in, and the Biden administration definitely has supported these rate hikes to help rein in inflation, but that helps drive up borrowing costs, leads to more household debt, more expensive mortgages, higher rates on student loans, car loans, etc. So yeah, there's definitely been ways that the American consumer has definitely been worse off over the last 27 months since Biden came into office. But I think there's plenty of plenty of caveats to also throw in there.